Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
Anytime we enter into any type of agreement, there are terms and conditions that come along with it. Buck last week, he talked about the two types of agreements you find in the Bible. I specifically want to talk about the terms and conditions that go with those. The old agreement required strict obedience to the law, including regular sacrifices to atone for sin. The terms and conditions were about 613 laws that the Israelites were required to follow. So what then are the terms and the conditions for you and me? This is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you. It's on me, it's for you. The new agreement is that we have the opportunity to be made right with God by grace through faith in Christ. So what then are the new terms and conditions? If it doesn't cost us anything to enter into it, what are the terms and conditions that we are agreeing to? Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another.
For all the sports buffs listening, watching, which I am the biggest.
Yeah, you were stayed up late last night, weren't you? I
Yep.
bet. I can picture you, edge of your seat, screaming, clapping.
Yep.
It was a good one, too.
Yeah, no, American Idol was great last night.
Oh, my gosh.
I just lost respect from like half of our audience.
I was saying you should just blame that on, having a 6-month-old, but you're like, nope, I just didn't watch it.
No, let me backtrack. It's all because I have a 5.5, 6-month-old.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
so give me the skinny. What happened?
It was the largest halftime comeback in NCAA history.
Yeah.
Like in a championship game.
Yeah.
In a championship game history. Kansas had this real hot start, then all of a sudden North Carolina dominated them for the rest of the first half, down 15 at halftime. They had tied it up within 8 minutes. It was
my
a
goodness.
wild comeback in the second half, and then it was just a really good game down the stretch from there. And so, yeah, it was exciting. I mean, I didn't really even pull for either team. I was like, it's cool that Kansas in the Big 12. The Big 12's won the last 2 championships now because Baylor won last year too. You know, so, but yeah, I mean, it was exciting.
We're a basketball conference.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, the Big 12 is really good in basketball, honestly. I keep forgetting that, when I think about Texas going to the SEC in football, I forget that they go there in every other sport, too. You know, I forget that, basketball is about to be in the SEC and all that. But, yeah, It was a good one. It delivered the whole tournament, bunch of good games this year. So, it was great. But maybe someday, I don't know, probably not.
Yeah.
I was just reading this morning, your personality and interests pretty much set after 30, so you're about to
I got 3 more years.
Yeah. If you don't like it at this point, you're just probably not going to get there. So.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Why do you think? Maybe it's, I could feel myself. I think early, when I was in teenage years, I maybe had a lot of FOMO about sports, gotta love sports so I can fit in.
Right.
And I now feel that less. I'm I know the things I like and enjoy, and if I'm hanging with my
you're
friends,
more just secure in yourself. So you're like, why do I even try now?
Guess so.
Yeah.
But I was really just trying to figure out why are we solidified on our interests after 30?
Yeah. I might have actually phrased that a little wrong. I'm sure somebody would call me out. Interest is an unfair way to say that. I think it was saying more personality, more.
Okay.
You're not going to switch from extroverted to introverted at 30 or vice versa.
I've been locked in there
Whereas,
since I was 5.
Yeah. In our 20s, that's true. But in our 20s, even your personality can still be shifting and molding, and there might be certain things that you behaved a certain way in your home, but then that kind of comes out in your 20s. So it was more about a book on your 20s. Anyways, that's not what this podcast is about. I still don't believe you're probably going to be in the edge of your seat for a national championship when you're 50, but who knows? Maybe you will be.
Okay. Hey, random question.
Yeah.
Have you read any good books lately?
Well, the one that I finished this morning was interesting. It's called The Greatest Decade, The Most Important Decade, Most Significant Decade. I don't know. I only read the title
really
once,
good decade.
It's written to 20-year-olds about being 20
Okay.
in your 20s.
Okay.
And the author's very clear, actually. She's like, it's not meant to be a book for like parents of 20-somethings. It's really meant to be directed at 20-somethings. But
Gotcha.
I thought it painted a really interesting picture of our culture right now. Kind of talks about, you know, how in your 20s it's seen as this go like explore, find yourself, travel the world. You don't have to think about anything serious till you're 30. And then every 30-year-old wakes up feeling a decade behind. Like there's no like in between. Like I'm not going to think about marriage till I'm 30. All of a sudden I wake up and I'm like, I'll marry anybody because I'm behind.
I'm almost dead.
Yeah, I don't have to figure out what I want to do with I'll just work at a coffee shop and have flexibility. I wake up at 30. Oh, I should have my master's degree already. So there's this like really, you know, bait and switch thing that culture does to us.
Yeah.
That's like rising right now with later and later adolescence and all this stuff, and then, you know, impact of social media on that. So it was really interesting, and but I enjoyed it from like a communicating to 20-somethings to technically, yeah, we are 20-somethings. So all those reasons, but
Very interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
How about
Cool.
you?
Oh man, let me think. Yeah, probably the best ones I've read recently that have been really interesting. I'm in this mode where I have like 15 books started on my Kindle because I keep getting excited about another one. So I need to stop buying books.
Yeah,
and
I do
just
the same thing.
Just go back and finish them. Yeah. So I've started some really great books. I've been reading for a while now. Live No Lies by John Mark Comer.
Okay.
I'm like 30% of the way through that, and it's like fantastic, but I keep getting distracted.
Yeah.
And then all family and father books. So like one called The Intentional Father by
sense.
John Tyson. One called Take Back Your Family, which was really, really cool, just about living, like setting a mission and value system for your family intentionally. Like most families live by default, not by design. And so living intentionally with your family and, you know, the difference between the nuclear family of like the 60s and the 70s and, you know, how our family systems have progressed today.
Yeah.
And then one called Habits of the Household, which is like, what are your habits in your house that determine like how your kids view church, view God, all that stuff. So it's all been family.
And you've still found time to read with a 6-month-old. You've been
well, most of it's listening. Most of it's in the car.
Yeah,
so it's
turning more
walking, it's
audiobook
driving.
now.
Yeah, not as much. Honestly,
I was gonna say,
I'm
that's
reading.
impressive.
I'm reading fiction to help like go to bed faster at night.
there you
So
go.
I'm going through Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire right now.
As you should.
Yeah,
As you
yeah.
should.
So it's my annual go through all 7 books and a
You
couple
do that
months.
every year?
I have accidentally done it every year now
Oh
for
my
like
gosh.
3 years.
I don't think I've read one since high school. I need to go back and do that. I'd enjoy it.
Yeah,
for
it probably
sure.
takes me a couple of months to go through all 7 if I just spend like 30 minutes reading before bedtime.
Yeah, that's a new fact about you. I really didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's
well,
amazing.
it's new for
Once
me
you get
too.
it tattooed on you, you gotta go all
Oh man, yeah. So we're in part 3 of yeah. No, we really should jump in. So
Okay.
part 3 of
Yes.
Why Did Jesus, and we're leading up to Easter. And what was interesting about your part 3 is it really felt like a part 2 to Buck's message last week.
Yeah.
Because it's just this conversation about the Old Covenant, the New Covenant, the Old Testament, the New Testament really feels like it does take a lot of content. Hard to hit that in like 30, 35 minutes. And so really was kind of a part 2. And I really like how you talked about the terms and conditions and how like, you know, God updated the terms and conditions with the New Covenant essentially is a great way to put it. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you finished it talking about this was through Jesus for people. Is that what you said at the end there?
Yeah, on Jesus for us.
On
Yep,
Jesus
yep.
for us.
Yep.
So it was on him, but the terms and conditions were for us, and that was kind of the whole point. Is it wasn't something we had to do, but what he did for us.
Yep.
And so I want to unpack some of these things a little bit further, and one of them that I think was just a really simple but helpful way to put it is you talk about, you know, the implications of this new covenant in our life. You know, why did Jesus come into the world? Why did he replace the old with the new? Well, one, it means that for us, a relationship with God is less complicated, but it is more demanding. So talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the closing question was like, what does love require of you? And so if I was just to ask that about any range of relationships in your life, you probably have a gut feeling that is accurate. I mean, certainly there are times where we get stuck. We don't really know. There's nuance. We need a counselor to get out of a situation. You know, all those things certainly happen. But if I was like, what does love require of you with your wife right now? What does love require of you with your husband? You know, with your kid, with your neighbor, with that coworker that you keep butting heads with your boss, you know, like what does love require of you? You may not want to do it. You may not want to think about it. You may not, but that's the very thing that I mean that is demanding, because like you already know. So that's what I mean that it's not less complicated. I don't need, hey, which verse in Deuteronomy, most applies to this situation, and does it contradict anything in Leviticus, or do you think, like I don't have to go through these 613 laws and like pick and pull and like put it all together. It's just like I probably know what love requires of me in this situation, and I can't use religion as any kind of a mask, right? So I can't just be like, oh, I'm praying about them. I've done nothing different, but I'm praying about them, So there's a lot of things that we could think about that, man, if I'm like attending church and reading my Bible and praying, like I'm good. Where the demanding thing would actually be to get involved, whether that's like giving up my time, personal self-sacrifice. It might be a financial investment. It might be like I got to skip something that I, wanted to go do or attend because I need to go have a conversation with this person. I need to go sit in a negative emotion. Or the most demanding parts usually are like when we have to look in our own heart. We have to deal with a negative emotion that's inside of us. Fair or unfair. I mean, it might be something you never asked to be in a situation. Like it was put on you, and now it feels like a lose-lose, because you either got to like stay in the ugly or deal with ugly, or, all that stuff happens. But that's what I mean. All those examples are way more demanding because I actually have to go do something. I actually have to go do something that costs me. Yeah. And that's why it's more demanding. So,
well, I think that's a different, probably, we don't think about our faith and go, what's the essential question of faith? Mm-hmm. What does love require of me? Mm-hmm. But, Jesus does, love God, love people, for, the most important commandments. Mm-hmm. And, most of us, probably just because of how we were brought up or how we viewed the church and our upbringing, our most essential question in faith is, how can I not make God mad at me? Mm-hmm. Or how can I not mess up too much? Or how close can I get to the line? Or, those kind of things, versus asking in all these situations, what does love require of me, both loving God and loving people in this situation?
Yeah. If I like totally dishonor somebody at an event or a party or something on a Saturday night, and then Sunday morning, they happen to be singing my favorite Jesus song, and I feel really warm and fuzzy inside as I'm singing that to God. And I did nothing to repair that person. I dishonored, disrespected. I'm not going to change anything. I'm probably going to go do the same behavior next Saturday night. I'm not saying that from like a judgmental place, like, oh, you're an awful. I'm just saying like that's less demanding if that's your approach. Yeah. That doesn't require a whole lot to just sing a song that makes you, feel more warm and fuzzy and not change anything. So, you were talking about like this, when Jesus is the example, He died for us. That's what we're called to with our spouses, not just go praying for your spouse is great. Not just go, but like, I got to go die for my spouse. What, specifically husbands for wives. Like that's just a whole different level of demanding. So that's what I mean when I say it's less complicated, but more demanding if you're going to actually go do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the Old Testament said, if you were to just go off the commandments there, now not all 613, but comprehensively, you would say, hey, don't cheat on your spouse and you're probably good. And then Jesus, what Paul talks about in Ephesians 5:25, like love your wife as Christ loved the church, what you're saying, like die for them. Right. Far more demanding. Right. And that's just one example. You can take it from marriage to finances to relationships to how we spend our time, like so many areas of life, and go, wow, yeah, this love ethic is far more demanding on us than the old covenant.
100%.
Yeah. So how did we, and when I say we, I say big C church, capital C church, how did we get this so wrong when Jesus, he was pretty dang clear. He said, a new command I give you, love one another. Yeah. Everything hangs on this new one. Like how do we stray so far from this?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question. Like, hey, if this is so clear, so obvious, if this is so fundamental, like why do we mess this up? And I think there's a couple different things that come to my mind when I think about addressing that. One is you never want to evaluate a belief system off of its abuse, right? You want to evaluate off of its fundamentals, off of its teachings, and so on. And so, Christians that get labeled as hypocritical, I'm like, maybe, plenty of us are. But I don't actually think it's hypocritical if I were to say, I can't love the way I desire to love, the way that I should love. I am imperfect. I'm a sinner in need of a Savior. That's why I need Jesus every day. That's why I need forgiveness, is because I can't live up to the standard that I desire to, right? But then from the outside looking in, you hear, oh, here's this whole faith based on love, but then I look at it and there's a bunch of Christians doing a whole bunch of unloving things. So there must be more to it, or there must be nothing to it, maybe, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. So I think some of it is like, okay, well, the adherents, us Christians, like we don't follow through with this perfectly, and then it creates a bunch of messiness and confusion and so on, and then we make some rules to make ourselves feel better about ourselves and so on. There's also just, I think, this natural pull. Maybe it's towards order, perhaps, or what we know. But you and Buck talked about this on last week's podcast, so I don't want to like dive into it too much. But you see this like immediately in Acts, like immediately there's like, okay, thanks Jesus, but now what are the new rules? Like, now let's give them something. Let's write these letters. Let's tell the churches.
That was the whole circumcision conversation.
Yeah. How do we pull like the temple right back in? How do we pull the structure right back in, you know? And we just typically desire what's easier. I mean, that's in anything. That's to make any kind of change, if that's a diet, if that's working out, if that's like to put in the energy and effort. If this love thing is more demanding, give me the rules, give me the loopholes. Like, I'll prefer that. That makes me feel more in control. And so the church has been doing that for a long time. I think the other dynamic that is perhaps newer is to say there's plenty of churches that have gotten this right. There's plenty of churches, and especially like through church history, that absolutely like we're not confused on this, and it changed the world once. So this doesn't mean like we've always gotten this wrong. Christianity never should have made it out of the first century if we weren't getting this right at one point. But today, one of the fundamentally new dynamics is the internet, is our phone. I mean, we have never had more one verse out of context, used politically, used to shame somebody, used to whatever, and now we don't understand how the two connect. Don't you know the Bible says, and I'm going to put up that Leviticus first, that or whatever it is, and now without the context, people are super confused. And so, people today are pretty much an expert in everything.
Well, you made me even think of, I mean, I was watching the news yesterday, and even the war on Ukraine, I was watching something about how like it's more of a world war than somebody was arguing. I'm not saying I fully support this argument. More of a world war than World War I and World War II, because the entire world is watching like they never have before. Like whereas World War I and World II, like the access to information, and so like propaganda was happening in the countries, but now I mean you just don't. It's so difficult to have a true pulse on what's happening because everybody's playing their game and and it's so much misinformation. But similar to how a lot of stuff can be taken out of context today as it relates to church and Christianity, and you see one thing on the news and then you just discount the entire belief system of Christianity based off that one thing. I made me even think of I was listening to a guy named Richard Rohr, and he's one of those like wise sage, has a lot of like really impactful studies and books and stuff, kind of like a Brennan Manning, and he just uses this term churchianity, and he says most people walk away from churchianity, not Christianity, and I thought that was a good way of putting it, you know, and he even uses the analogy to say that like people throw away the entire container without checking like what are in the contents. What are the contents inside of that container? Look at the contents, not the container, because the contents would say the container will always be at fault. Like we are broken people representing a perfect God. We're always going to get it wrong.
100%.
Yeah. So talking about love, what does love require? How is our definition of love, culture, society, I don't know, different from God's definition of love? Because we keep talking about how Jesus really raises the demand of what love means and what it requires. So how is our definition different?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question too. Again, it probably feels like there's lots of ways, and maybe at its most core is this, I don't know that I'm going to phrase this perfectly, but in culture it feels like love seems to be self-focused and self-centered a whole lot more frequently as compared to Jesus's definition of love, which seems to be self-emptying, self-sacrificial. Like maybe that's the simplest way. I would also say, there's just so many complexities. There's a language problem of we use the same word love for everything, So to say
I
that
love Chick-fil-A. Right. I love my wife.
Yeah. I love my dog. I love the NCAA tournament, and I love, my mother. And so there's just it gets confusing in terms of how we use that word. I definitely think culturally there's a huge emphasis on the emotional aspect of it, the feeling. I've always been fairly confused by kind of the phraseology of I love you, but I'm not in love with you. That kind of, I feel an emotion for it. I'm not sure exactly what that means. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's this component of of love that is absolutely emotion, absolutely the will, but then there's this enormous component of love that is action oriented. Like this agape love, God love is this all encompassing. My posture is for you. I do for you. I feel for you. I think of you. It's my intellect. It's my emotion. It's my action.
Yeah.
And it's all of that wrapped up into, whereas, in our culture, it's so emotional. And I think the other one this is why I say this is a selfish way to approach love, even though we don't realize it, is so often love is like, I'm just going to do the thing that doesn't upset you, Jeremy. So like you could be destroying your life, destroying your marriage, destroying whatever. And I could just look at you and be like, man, Jeremy, it's all okay, dude. Like it's all fine. Like just do what you want to do. It's okay. Whereas like a loving friend would be like, dude, like I need to, I'm going to like, hey, I love you. Mm-hmm. And so therefore like, man, what's going on? Can I help? Like we need to talk, and you might get angry and you wouldn't, because you're a great dude and you take great feedback.
But I'm just
angry. Saying it's like there's this like feeling of like don't upset people, and in reality, love is very frequently like totally the opposite. I mean, when that relationship is built and that trust is built, what's the Proverbs verse? I always kind of mess it up. A friend will.
Wounds from a friend
can be trusted, but an enemy will multiply kisses, something like that, right? Yeah. So it's that kind of a concept, but in culture, you won't find that. It's like, I'm just going to affirm all your behaviors and all your desires as totally fine.
Yeah.
And I don't think in a lot of cases, that's a very loving approach.
Yeah.
So,
and it's kind of, I mean, it's not like, it's a natural bend to be like more self-interested. I've shared this maybe on this podcast before, definitely with you, but I remember we were doing counseling one time, and it was Ashley and I in the room with our counselor, and he said, Jeremy, share 3 things you love about Ashley. And I said something about like, I love that she's my best friend. I love, how when we spend time together, I said a couple of things that were like nice things.
Yeah.
And then he said, okay, now say you just shared 3 things. He told me, you just shared 3 things about what you love about her and how she loves you. You didn't share 3 things at all about her. Yeah. It was just about how she makes you feel.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, we so naturally go like, oh man, I love them because of how they make me feel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, it's one of the most memorable stories I've heard you share because it's so relatable. Like we all do that. Yeah. 100%. I love them because of how they make me feel. Wait, what? You just flipped right back on you. Yeah. 100%.
Yep. So, okay, so to wrap up this series, we've been talking a lot about, in these last 2 parts, the Old and the New Covenant, the Old and the New Covenant, the Old and the New Testament, and I want to like just provide an opportunity to give some handles on a way forward for really 2 different camps of people. The first camp of people is somebody who is not a follower of Christ, and maybe they're coming back to church, they're new to church, or they're new to Christianity, and they're like, they've heard things about the Old Testament that have turned them off in the past, or the Old Covenant, or been treated in such a way. What would you say to them? How should they view the Old Covenant if they're trying to kind of re-engage Christianity for the first time in a while?
Well, I think, for somebody that's trying to re-engage Christianity, this is incredibly helpful and relevant. To them, I would just clarify as quick as we could what we've talked about in the series, that there was a, timestamp, geo-specific, set of rules and guidelines. It's super helpful in advance for a time for a group of people, but that's not on you. And, Siri couldn't hear you. But, for those people, I would hope that that's very freeing to be like, there is a new agreement, a new opportunity for you, and it's all on Jesus. And I think to so many people that are new to faith, that would be so freeing. The more like, I don't know, the more scholarly side or intellectual side, like I have a desire to clarify what then the Old Testament is, which I think that probably ends up being more helpful for somebody who's like been raised in church. Somebody who is Christian, there's this tension that comes up in us when we have these conversations, because we're kind of trained like, wait a minute, what are you saying? So does that mean you don't believe in the Old Testament? Do you think that's not God's word? Or do you, all that kind of stuff comes up in us. And some of that's a good tension, because some of that's the tension you see in Acts. Some of that's the tension of change and getting up all the religion and the rules. So I don't want to do away with all of that tension, because some of that I really would want us to explore that. And at the same time, if I could speak on behalf of pretty much all, Protestant evangelical churches, like we would say the Old Covenant is divinely inspired. It is the word of God. It is true. in terms of its history. It's true in terms of all things, but I'm trying to give some ways in terms of how it's true. It's true historically. It's true in terms of principles and guidelines.
Experientially.
Right, exactly, all these things. And something can be true and not applicable to you. That's true in the New Testament as well. There are verses written to wives that are not applicable to you and I. You and I are not a wife. You know what I mean? Like there's verses to husbands that's applicable to us. It's the same way in the Old Testament. Something can be true and not applicable to you. And so anything that is in the Old Testament law, once we start getting into these 613 commandments for the Israelites, there are still principles that we can take out of there. So I think of the 2 Timothy, it's 3:16 and 17. All scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. There are absolutely principles that we can, garner from Old Testament stories and, Old Testament, even rules that were applicable to them. Like maybe why did God have that law in place that specific one isn't, but is there a transcendent principle here that's still true or still helpful in my life? So I think there are all kinds of ways that we don't have to hide it. We don't have to cover it up. We don't have to explain the Old Testament away. I think it's perfectly fine to say, I don't know why that's in there because I'm not an ancient Israelite and I don't have all the context and I don't know the native language and I'm not really sure. I mean, I just know that today that's not binding on me. I'm sure it had something for its, a time and a purpose. And I think that's like really helpful to keep it all in its context. It can all be God's word, can all be divinely inspired. It can all be helpful. It can be things to garner from it, but don't mix and match. Like, please, don't, whenever you pull that forward, that's when it gets confusing. That's when it becomes religious. That's when it becomes temple model. That's when it's like, hey, you got to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, no, it's on Christ alone now. That's it.
Yep.
So,
and back to what we started with, when you can stay in that space, you discover it's far less complicated, far more demanding.
Mm-hmm.
It demands a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, we were talking about this beforehand. I wanted to read like all of Hebrews 8 on Sunday, but it was just, I only had time for that one verse because I had a whole bunch of verses in there. But like even going back a few verses from where I started, verse 6 of Hebrews 8 says, but now Jesus, and I love the way it even but now Jesus, our high priest, has been given a ministry that is far superior to the old priesthood, for he is the one who mediates us a far better covenant with God based on better promises. Like if I was like the New Testament is better than the Old, it's a better agreement, it's a better covenant, that would be an incredibly biblical statement to make. And it feels, again, controversial if there's confusion, if we don't understand what we're really saying here. If the first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no need for a second covenant to replace it. That's not Jordan's opinion, by the way, if you're not like watching the video. I'm reading Hebrews 8 here. If the first covenant had been faultless, that's 8:7. There would be no need for a second covenant to replace it. But when God found fault with the people, he said, and then he reads the whole Jeremiah verse, which I actually did read on Sunday, which ends with, and I will forgive their wickedness. I will never again remember their sins. And then 8:13 is what I had on Sunday. When God speaks of a new covenant, it means he has made the first one obsolete. It is now out of date and will soon disappear. And not everything in the Old Testament is the Old Covenant, so we got a language game going on here. Genesis is not laying out all of the rules and laws and commandments for nation of Israel. That's talking about the story of creation, at least in the beginning, the first 10 chapters. So it's just, there's all of this that gets confusing, but I don't know if I confuse people more, if that's helpful. But
no, I think it's good, man. I think it's good. So. And I would just say for me personally, I read a little from the Old and the New Testament, like when I spend time with God,
100%.
And most of my reading in the Old Testament is Psalms and Proverbs because I just find that for my faith to be the most helpful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I like to, go back and read the story of Israel and how, all that stuff too. But like Psalms that just so help point you to God. Just the way they wrote them, the way they connected to God back then is so fascinating. And then Proverbs, reading something that a guy wrote down, 3,500 years ago. I don't know if that's correct or not. It's around 3,000 years ago. That is applicable to me today. Is just crazy. Like it is such a relevant document, and it's helpful. But like we're saying, it's not the whole thing. It is the new covenant. Is what kind of changes the game.
I might wrap it by saying the reason we're going to try to clarify as a church, like Northpoint's going to keep harping on this and try and make it as clear as possible, is because our vision is to make Jesus relevant for everyone in Greater Austin. If we were all just Christians and we just hung out with our Christian friends, this is ultimately yes, we believe the whole Bible is inspired, so Old Testament, New Testament, read it all every day, fantastic. If you care at all about somebody who does not yet know Jesus, someday perhaps inviting him into their life, you would care a lot deeply about this conversation, because 99.9% of the attack on faith is allowing people to choose the battleground of the Old Testament, and they never get to the conversation of who is Jesus because they're taking an Old Testament passage, story, whatever, out of context that seems barbaric, that seems like how could that apply or how could that be true, and we never get to Jesus. The reason we take the Old Testament seriously is because Jesus took the Old Testament serious. This whole conversation adds weight to the Old Testament. It doesn't take it away.
Yeah.
You know, we're like, Jesus took it seriously, so we take it seriously. Otherwise, what ground do we have to stand on, right? So this makes it more true to us, not less true to us. It's not a conversation we need to be afraid of. It's one we should very much, lean into.
Yeah.
So,
man, that's so good. Well, we are wrapping up the series this coming Sunday, part 4 of Why Did Jesus? And we're going to talk about, the story leading up to the Easter. And we're specifically going to hit on, why did Jesus have to die? Why was that significant in this replacement from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant? Why was that part of the equation? And so Buck is going to unpack that. I'm really excited. I think it's going to be a fantastic message.
Somewhat important question.
Yes, somewhat important question, in the grand scheme of things. Yeah. And then after that, it's Easter. And if you are local, we would love to see you in person, as we're going to have 2 services on Saturday at 4 and 5:30 Easter weekend, 3 services on Sunday, 8:30, 10, and 11:30. Go to mpaustin.com/Easter if you need to see or hear those dates again. And if you are watching online, then we'll be streaming live every service as well. So you can just tune in whenever you want to with you and your family from home.
It's Easter 2022, in case somebody's finding this a long time from now.
Yes.
Just to clarify.
Yes, that is very good. Yeah, they're like, it's 2024, and we're doing Easter on a Wednesday
showed up at 8:30 and you guys
Thursday.
didn't.
Yeah. Cool. Well, with that, we will see everybody in person this week or online.